Welcome to the FarrCast, bringing you insights into Wall Street, Washington, and the world. And now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. It is April the 11th. We're going to start to see some earnings coming in here on companies. That'll be good because we need something to talk about other than the Fed and what's going on in Washington. My goodness. That story really doesn't change a whole lot, except if you've been listening to the FarrCast, you've listened to me and other say, as long as this economic data, as long as it stays hot, then the Fed doesn't have any reason to do anything. They don't have any reason to cut. If you've listened to the FarrCast, you've listened to me say 7 or 8 cuts this year is absurd. Absurd. It's the market's narrative, not the Fed's narrative. Look what's happening. And markets are having their tantrum. This is a little bit longer run this time, meaning that we're not just building things up prior to the next Fed meeting and then everybody having a little bit of a tantrum with the market going down. This is a longer term tantrum right now. But if the Atlanta Fed is anywhere close with their 2.6% GDP growth estimate, there's not a problem with the U.S. economy with unemployment below 4%. The problem is inflation hasn't died yet. So the Fed has no reason to cut rates and, in fact, could cause itself a lot of problems. What do we know? We know that markets pulled back 1% yesterday. They're headed a little bit lower today. They asked Jeremy Siegel on Squawk Box this morning, is this a buying opportunity? Oh, for the love of God, it went down 1% yesterday. Right. 1%. How much money would you like to invest with me for a 1% gain? Huh? How upset would you believe? I mean, you buy low. You don't buy what? 1%? Dear God. So you also have to remember the gnat-like attention span of the media today. They've got to fill a 3-hour show every morning with somebody saying, well, what does this mean? And what should you do to your portfolio? And what do they know on TV? Kenny Polcari is going to be our first guest today. God bless him, and joining us. And he's been doing this forever. I've been doing this forever. The one thing they really like you to do every time they want you on TV, doesn't matter which station, doesn't matter what network, they want you to give them actionable information because that's what viewers respond to most. They don't want to hear us talk about the Fed all that much. There's mild interest in that. They want to hear us say, buy XYZ and sell ZYX. That's what they want us to do, which is kind of a fool's errand because it's not what any pro does. We buy portfolios. We manage portfolios. We don't sit around and flip stocks and buy stuff and trim stuff and do this stuff, but it's not what we do. So markets may pull back a little bit here. What do? You stay dispassionate, you stay disciplined, you avoid emotion, which is the foe of the long-term investor, and you make very deliberate decisions about your long-term portfolio. If I buy a stock today, I hope that I hold it 5 years, 7 years, 10 years from now. I really do. So that's what I'm looking to do. Kenny Polcari joins us. He's CEO of Case Capital Advisors. He is the chief market strategist for Slate Stone Wealth. And he's my now actually much older friend because he had a birthday and I haven't yet. So here's the 63-year-old Kenny Polcari. Good morning, Kenny.
You kill me. Yours is just days away there, my friend. Don't you worry about it. You're going to be 63 before you know it.
No, mine is weeks away. Weeks away. Kenny,
yeah, listen,
what did I get wrong in my opening monologue there?
You didn't. I was just going to say you hit every nail on the head. It's absolutely so true. You know, the television stations want some reaction every single day. Look, like you said, yesterday the market sold off 1%. We're 2.2% off the high. Still nothing to write to mommy about because that's not a big deal, right? You want to see the market back off. You want to see the market, a 6 or 7 or 8% correction would be very welcome as a long-term investor, especially now. You want to see that happen because you want to shake the branch a little bit. That's when you might want to talk about, okay, what are we buying now down 6 or 7 or 8%, right? But down 1 or 2%, it's ridiculous because you have this portfolio, you've created it, you've planned it, you know what it's, you know how it's going to perform. The fundamental story itself for that individual name has not changed. And so therefore there's no reason to buy or sell it.
See, Polcari sounds like a trader to me. He sounds like a trader. He sounds like that floor guy looking for 6 to 8%, because the old investment guy who's never done the day-to-day stuff is sitting here going 6 to 8%. I'm thinking 15 to 20. Now that's when I want to buy, is 15 to 20. I want to see the damn thing down at least over 10. But, I also know, and I don't mean to stomp on your line here, Kenny. Well, yeah, I do. I mean, he's also thinking there's $7 trillion sitting in money market. You are smoking dope, Farr, if you think all that cash on the sideline is going to actually let this thing flush out down 15%, even though it probably should. Would you agree with even though it probably should?
I agree with you. Listen, I agree with you that we should do it. But here's the problem. Every time the market backs off about 3%, they all run right in because they think, okay, now it's down. And we never get down. We never shake the branches hard enough to get it down 10 or 12 or 15%. Now, look, that doesn't mean, though, individual names aren't down that much. There are individual names within the groups that are off more. So that's where you strategically can start to snoop around and say, okay, is this one, what do we think? If there's more downside, then there's going to be more downside. But if you can buy, a significant name all down 15 or 16%, then you might want to start to consider doing that, even though the broad market's only off, 2.2%. So you have to be strategic in your planning and strategic in kind of how you look at what you own, what's going to benefit. Is there more downside? And if there isn't, then you strategically can do that while the market still may only be off a little bit.
For all the trouble we've got in Washington right now, Kenny, and it's getting worse with this Mike Johnson and these right-wing Republicans and this Marjorie Taylor Greene, who seems like a total nut job to me. I mean, seriously, I don't know what's wrong with this woman. That's not a partisan statement, but there is no connection between what comes out of her mouth and the reality they're dealing with in Washington. Nobody. And listen, I say the same thing about AOC on the other side of the aisle. But this is the Republicans' AOC, and she's not helping. When you look at what's going on, Kenny, tell me how you think the rest of this summer plays out going up to the election. What do you think happens in markets? And then we got to go.
So listen, I think the market's going to remain a little bit more volatile, but not because of the election at all. I'm not saying I think they're going to remain volatile because of inflation and economic data and Fed. That's where I think the volatility is going to come from. The election, I think we're probably 50-50. It could go one way or the other, right? Today, I feel like maybe the Republicans are going to win, but you could go 3 months from now and Joe Biden pulls something out of his hat and buy all these votes where suddenly it flips. So you shouldn't be planning your investments around whether it's a Democrat or Republican in the White House. You can plan around what policy may happen, but you're not buying or selling stocks based on Trump or Biden, not at all. And so I think you have to be much more concerned as a wealth manager and as an investor in the economic data over the next 5 or 6 months and what that says about the broader economy and the longer term economy. And we're going to get some insight on that this week when we start with the big banks going to start reporting tomorrow. And we're going to listen to what they say about, sales and trading and net interest income. But the key to the banks, I think, is going to be what they say about the loan loss reserve account, because that suggests what they then think about what's going to happen in the economy. If they start building up that loan loss reserve account even more than they have, they're suggesting that they're preparing for tougher times. I think that's a key factor that, we as wealth managers can start to pay attention to and be able to have that conversation with nervous clients.
Those loan loss reserves are really important that Kenny mentions. And that's why the banks are very important, because it's not just the banks saying, well, how do we feel about this really? They have insights. They have data. They're talking to those customers who are having problems paying those loans back. If you own a big office building and half of your people are moving out because of lease expiration, and you're having trouble coming up with the cash to make your payments, you go talk to your bank. You go talk to your bank before you get in trouble. So they're hearing all of that, and they've got to make an assessment by law, to maintain their credit standards and make sure that they're solvent and in good standing with the Fed, their local federal banks. So Southern banks, most of them will be either at the Atlanta Fed or the Richmond Fed. They'll be monitored by one of those two Federal Reserve banks. They've got to be in talks with those banks so they know. So this is really transparency. This is where we see it first, and it matters to the old pros like Kenny and me. Kenny, final word for us this morning. Tell us what you're thinking about. And again, as we look for interest rates, where do we end up in 6 months or the end of the year?
So listen, I thought Jamie Dimon had a very interesting annual letter. He has been calling for higher rates. I'm in the camp that we're potentially going to see higher rates. I don't see rates coming down. I see as Janet Yellen brings more treasury supply to the market to fund the massive debt and getting bigger every 100 days, that's going to put pressure on the bond market, pushing bond prices down and yields higher. And so I think you have to be sensitive to that. You have to understand that if we kiss 4.75 or 5% in the 10-year treasury, that the stocks are going to probably struggle a little bit, but that's okay, as long as you're in a well-diversified kind of large mega cap, solid names in the industries you want to be in, and you got time on your side. To your point, you need to ride it out. Now, if the fundamental story changes, that's another reason to have a conversation. But if the fundamental story for the names that you own hasn't changed and it's an economic cycle, then you ride through it and you prepare for it.
Don't forget that stocks are close to 20 times earnings right now. 20 times earnings is not cheap by anybody's measure.
Correct.
So,
correct.
Is it sunny outside, or is it dark outside? Is it daytime or nighttime? Is the damn thing high or the damn thing low? That's not a matter of opinion, folks. Read the numbers. See if you can see your shadow or not. Kenny Polcari.
And those numbers become important as interest rates tick up. Then those numbers get even more important. If you got low interest rates, then 20 times may not feel expensive. But when you got rates that, kiss at 5%, 20 times can be expensive.
And that is another really important point from Polcari. It matters where those interest rates are, big time. And as those interests, and it also matters on the rate of inflation. And when the rate of inflation stays low, those numbers can go higher. But when inflation starts to go up, you begin to lose the value of the earnings, right? 5% inflation takes money away from the real bottom line, from real earnings. Kenny Polcari, we're out of here, Kenny, is the head of Case Capital Advisors, chief market strategist, Slate Stone Wealth, and my great older friend. We'll see you soon, Kenny. Coming up, Dan Mahaffee from the Center for the Study of the Presidency of Congress and the Dr. Scholl Foundation, and the great Lester Munson, FarrCast fan favorite. Stay with us.
Thank you for joining us this week on the FarrCast. Now it's time for political analyst Dan Mahaffee and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back. Terrific segment with Kenny Polcari. Always fun to talk to my friend Kenny. And I did call him when he was overseas for his happy birthday, just to make sure that he knew that I knew. That's what we had to go there. Joining us now, Dan Mahaffee from the Dr. Scholl Foundation, where he is vice chairman, and moving on up from the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. He's still there as a fellow. Dan, what are you? What's your title there? You're a fellow.
The Eisenhower Fellow.
The Eisenhower Fellow.
Yes. I like Ike.
I like Ike.
Is there an Estes Kefauver Fellow? If we're going to use people from the 50s? I mean, can I be the Estes Kefauver Fellow?
Do you know that there is the Eisenhower Cabin, which we can all see this afternoon at the Masters at Augusta National Golf Club? And Mamie Eisenhower loved being there and loved the Eisenhower Cabin. And she kept going after Ike died because she thought it was really her cabin, and they kind of had to talk to her after a while and go, actually, Mrs. Eisenhower, no, doesn't work that way.
Augusta Security did not take kindly to me thinking that the fellowship also included access to the cabin earlier this week.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, that you should give him a call and say, do you know who I am? I'm the Eisenhower. You're the Eisenhower Scholar or Fellow? What are you?
Fellow, Eisenhower Fellow.
Oh, well, that's more important. Tell him that that's more important. They might not know that down there.
What I really need, though, is we're going to get in the weeds. I need an Alan Dulles Fellow to do my dirty work.
Definitely need a little Alan Dulles. You might even a little assist from J. Edgar Hoover. All right, moving right along, Mr. Mahaffee. Mike Johnson seems to be absolutely 1 foot on the dock, 1 foot on the boat, and other precarious analogies. Tell us what's going on, and does he survive this?
Welcome to being a leader in the modern Republican Party, Speaker Johnson.
I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I do not understand this human being, as I do not understand AOC. But because of their extremism, they both remain popular. And this could be a bigger political move for Marjorie Taylor Greene, and successful, by saying, I'm the person who threw out Speaker Johnson, even though that brought the Congress to its knees and crippled them for months afterwards.
Yeah, I think the storm and noise that Marjorie Taylor Greene has right now would largely be insulated by the fact that, one, there's no other Republicans besides some of the others in the Freedom Caucus who would want to go on with this. Again, that narrow majority gives them the power, though. We know this is the same script since last year. That hasn't changed. What I think has changed, though, is that Democrats are willing, if we see reasonable action on Ukraine, we just saw it too on FISA, that they will protect Speaker Johnson if they need to keep the Congress going for the rest of the year. If he does not try and put other conservative priorities into these measures, they will support him. And I think that's, as we saw with this vote on FISA that just failed, the rules vote on that.
Hang on. FISA is hugely important. This is a really important thing. Would you explain what
Correct.
FISA
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. It is what looks at the
wait a minute.
Requests.
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance what?
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is FISA, but it covers the courts that handle the warrants for wiretaps and intercepts related to foreign intelligence, espionage, NSA type intercept type stuff. And that is something where that is reauthorized because, unlike China or Russia, we have congressional oversight over our intelligence. Our lawmakers handle our national security. And in that rule of law, though, you have to reauthorize this, and Republicans balked at that. And that is largely because former President Trump believes that FISA played a big role in the Russian scandals surrounding his administration. So conservative Republicans stopped the reauthorization of foreign intelligence. You even have Senator Marco Rubio saying, if we don't have this, we might as well get out of the intelligence game, period. You're not a nation if you don't have this ability to do intelligence. But former President Trump told Republicans to not authorize it, spoke out against it, and therefore the rule to reauthorize this in the House was voted down. I think we'll see in a day or two, Democrats will again work with the moderate Republicans to reauthorize this. But it has just shown that the speaker can't really govern his own party, and two, he's one tweet or truth away from anything being derailed.
Very quickly, quick answer. Does he survive this?
Yes.
He does. And so he's going to reach across the aisle and he's going to make it happen.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, hearken back with me, if you will, to a glorious time. Now, you're not going to like what I'm going to say, or you might understand it, but the glory days of America post 9/11. For those of you who were of age after 9/11, our country came together in a way that it has throughout its history, where American people locked arms, held hands, stood united in fellowship and brotherhood, and we didn't care whether you were Republican, a Democrat. We didn't care if you were black, white, yellow, or any other color. If you had an American flag on your lapel, you were our brother, you were our sister, and we stood united. It was a wonderful time. It's hard for me to figure out how far we've come and traveled so far away from those moments. But the one thing that happened, and there's not an easy answer to this in Farr's opinion, one thing that happened, we were willing to do anything to protect this country. And that included very broad powers for the government under this FISA Act to listen into whatever the hell conversations. I'm not worried. You listen to any conversation I have, government, if you can protect this country. But it was a relinquishing of civil liberties for the sake of defense, for fear, for saying there is a greater cause in America for which I am willing to forego some of my privacy. And there were bumper stickers that it said, that I read one that said, "It's okay, President Bush, I wasn't using my civil liberties anyway." I mean, it was sort of funny and sort of not. There is a real issue here, isn't there, Dan, about Americans' privacy?
There is a real issue, and there was actually the irony of this is that conservatives wanted some reforms. Intelligence like this brings about strange bedfellows. You actually had the right and the left wanting some reforms on this. They won't get them, though, because when you vote down the legislation that would have had some reforms in it, you're forced to go to the floor with just a basic reauthorization with no reforms. If you're tracking that, Michael, because they torpedoed their original bill, they don't get any of what they wanted in the first place.
Yeah.
If you want half a cookie, say please and use your words. If you throw a tantrum, you're not going to get any cookie.
Damn it, that was funny. And it's absolutely right. And it harkens back also to that wonderful book, Everything I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. I talked to Ross Perot. I had breakfast with Ross Perot and his wife, Laurie, and I did just before he announced he was running for president. He said that was one of his favorite books, which is really ironic because this was a man who had a temper and was something of had a Napoleonic complex. Sorry, but that was my experience of him. Anyway, those are the basic lessons. Say please and thank you. Use your words. I wish we could get AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene to use their words. Well, maybe I don't know. Please and thank you. I'd settle for a lot less out of either one of them and be very satisfied. Still probably exceeding my expectations.
Right. And it comes down to, I think, a longer term concern for these Republicans as they look at this is that former President Trump, when is the pivot from his past grievances to running for office? Because if he's still screaming about FISA, if he's still worried about these things in a way that kneecaps our legitimate intelligence capabilities, when is he pivoting from his 2020 grievances to what is his agenda for the future?
It's a great question. When?
That is the question. That is what Republicans are very worried about as they see behind the scenes, as they see Biden's poll numbers somewhat stabilizing now that the public is waking up to the actual choice and contrast between the two.
So, Dan, people will from time to time come up to me and say, why don't you run for office? Why don't you run for Senate? Why don't you run for president? You're a reasonable guy. And I'll say, one, I'm surprised you hate me that much. What a horrible job. I'd never want it. But two, I'd never get elected as dog catcher because I'm a centrist. You think I'm reasonable. We're not electing reasonable people. So I don't know how Speaker Johnson's going to govern other than to be able to put himself in the position of passing whatever is absolutely necessary. Is that your point about him going to the other side of the aisle? And then I'm going to move on.
That is his really only path to survival right now, is to get this through and try and get to the election, keeping things open.
Okay. Now, the Japanese prime minister was here. Is that a big deal? Japanese prime minister here?
I think it's a very big deal. Look, set aside the difficulties over the Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel discussion. We'll table that. What you did see is the biggest deepening of the U.S.-Japan alliance since the end of World War II. I think the bringing Japan at a level almost like the United Kingdom My colleague and I always comment there's a certain irony that our foreign policy is entirely based on two islands in the middle of the ocean that drink tea and drive on the wrong side of the road. But both the United Kingdom and Japan are vital to our national security. And we are elevating the relationship with Prime Minister Kishida at a time when Japan is not only rebuilding and advancing its military, but looking too at how it works to overcome the significant historical baggage for Japan to work with countries like South Korea, the Philippines, and others, Vietnam as well, as they all become concerned about China.
Okay, Israel is changing. Give me your quick take on what's going on there. Does Ukraine get funded at any point here? I know Speaker Johnson has a big problem. So first on the funding for Ukraine, then what happens in Israel? And I got 2 minutes, Dan.
I think in Israel, I don't know how to say "oh bleep" in Hebrew, but I think that is what Netanyahu said after he got off the phone with Biden. At least if what we've seen and can believe that some of these measures they've taken are being done, but I don't really see much of it changing because these are all maneuvers for his political survival between Washington on one hand and his base on the other in Israel.
Does this escalate to an Iran-Israel sort of a battle and pitch?
I'm a little skeptical of that because thus far, even though the Israelis did hit that Iranian consulate or embassy in Damascus, the Iranians have been angry. They've talked about it a lot. We haven't seen them do anything yet. The question is, are there these unwritten and somewhat written rules in the Middle East that are holding for now because Iran doesn't want a full war either?
Dan, I think they're winning the PR war. Hamas and Iran are winning the PR war. And our friend, your friend, my friend from News Nation, Leland Vittert, has pointed out in his writings that basically the Constitution, the mission statement for Hamas is the annihilation of the Jewish people in Israel. They call for, according to Leland, for another Holocaust. Why, with that sort of language and venom, are they being given a pass in the media and being seen and viewed as the victim?
Well, look, former President Trump said it well in his own comments, and I hear it too when I talk to other people about Israel. Just the images from Gaza of destruction, of starving civilians, of rubble, speak volumes more than Hamas's constitution in the battle for public opinion.
And I think that's it. Anything, what's going to keep you up at night this week, Dan?
Keeping me up at night this week, I continue to look at the Middle East. We have to, I think that holds though. And then frankly, how do we answer some of these legislative questions and keeping Speaker Johnson there with such a narrow majority? This, again, harkens back to my concern pre-election. I didn't care who won. I just wanted them to have a manageable majority, and we don't.
Dan Mahaffee is vice chairman of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, and he is our senior political analyst on the FarrCast. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Michael.
We're going to be back with Lester Munson from the BGB Group. Stay with us, please.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr.
We appreciate you listening into the FarrCast this week. And now to introduce this week's special guest, here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back. Joining us now, Lester Munson. He runs the international practice at the BGR Group. which is a government relations lobbyist firm in Washington, D.C. If you need an insider to help you get in the office and get it done, Les Munson is the guy, and he's focused on, listen, Middle East, Europe, and Latin America. You think we have anything to talk about with the Middle East and Les Munson today? Oh, my God, 26-year career on Capitol Hill. This guy is a pro's pro. Welcome back, Les.
Thanks, Michael. Great to see you.
We are really happy to have you back on. We were talking in segment 2 with Dan Mahaffee about Mike Johnson, the trouble he's in, Marjorie Taylor Greene, whom I said earlier with Kenny Polcari that she is the right wing's answer to AOC, and neither one of them requires an answer as far as I'm concerned. Both of those representatives could end up somewhere else. I can't imagine. I can't see one thing that either one of those reps adds to the discussion. You were on Capitol Hill yesterday. Give us the temperature there. How does Congress function when the speaker can be replaced every time somebody doesn't like whatever he says? How can Congress function if we keep throwing out speakers?
Well, it's the game has changed, Michael, and it's been changing for a long time. It's now kind of reached this crazy situation, as you point out, where really just 2 or 3 members, Republicans, could potentially oust the speaker. And the speaker, if that were to happen, if Marjorie Taylor Greene goes ahead with her move and gets a couple of her colleagues to support her, then Mike Johnson's got an existential question. Does he go to the Democrats to support his speakership to stay in office, or does he kind of bite the bullet and take an exit and maintain his kind of more pure Republican bona fides? It's a crazy situation politically, where such a small, because the margins between the two parties is so tight, and Republicans literally have a 2-vote majority in the House right now. It's going to go down pretty soon to a 1-vote majority. It's unprecedented, I would say, certainly in recent history, and it's impacting policy decisions, including huge policy decisions with huge implications for foreign policy. Are we going to continue to aid the Ukrainians in their fight against Russia? Are we going to double down on aid to Israel in the middle of a major Middle East crisis? Are we going to come to the aid of Taiwan as China continues to rattle sabers in that region? There's all kinds of questions. Meanwhile, the president's having, a state dinner with the Japanese prime minister. There is a lot of stuff going on, and Congress really isn't on point with its ability to play a constructive role here.
The state dinner with the Japanese prime minister, was that Nero fiddling as Rome is burning?
No, this is such an important meeting, Michael. Japan is our closest ally in the Indo-Pacific. We do all kinds of stuff with Japan. Japan is going through kind of its own political changes. Is it going to embrace a larger defense role in the region? What are the implications of that? There are good ones, and there are some ones to be concerned about. The U.S. has to balance all of those things. Think about a rising China. There's conflict between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea, or as the Philippines call it, the West Philippine Sea. That is literally boats crashing into each other. Vietnam is kind of going back and forth trying to figure out which way should they tilt in all of this. They're generally tilting towards us, but is that going to continue? There are so many things going on in the world. It's wrong to say the world is ablaze, but everything is changing around the world right now, and we've got an administration that's trying to juggle all of those things with a president who's maybe lost a step or two because of his age, and a Congress that is not super functional. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned.
Okay, there are all the reasons to be concerned. What happens now? Does Mike Johnson, if I'm Mike Johnson, I'm going to make the deal across the aisle, and I'm going to make a big deal across the aisle, as big as I can, and do 2 things. Stay as long as I can for the good of the country, to provide that stability and advance a reasonable agenda if I can work that out. Question, can he work that out?
It's a great question. He's kind of a rookie He's a young guy. He has not spent a ton of time in the House or a ton of time in leadership. He did have a minor leadership position before he became Speaker. He's had some fumbles. He's had some achievements. It's a little, he's pretty well liked by most of his colleagues, with the exception of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I think even she would say, actually, I kind of like him as a person, even if she's got these apparent political disputes with him. Is he up to the job? It's a great big question. What will this aid package look like? He's been talking about teeing it up. Now is the time. No one's seen it yet. What are the components of it? Is he going to tie it to LNG exports, which is going to drive the Democrats nuts, and maybe harm their ability to keep him in the speakership, but it might get him some allies on the Republican side? It's totally unclear if he's going to be able to do this. We might know by next Tuesday or Wednesday how this is going to shape up, but right now we don't know.
So dysfunction there, and what's your guess? Does he do it or not?
I think, Michael, I don't know. I think he's got a shot to do a deal here with the Democrats with a package that's going to look a lot like what President Biden asked for and what the Senate passed. I don't think he's going to get the LNG exports relief that he might be looking for.
Right.
That's going to be a bridge too far, and is really not as much as I think that's a good idea policy wise. It's not a bipartisan solution, and the Democrats are just not going to go for that. So he's going to have to compromise. It's going to be a severe compromise, and then I think he's going to end up relying on Democrats to stay in office through the rest of the year. That's my best guess, but I really don't know.
Les, I've been reading briefs from News Nation, from my friend Leland Vittert over there. And he's been suggesting that Hamas and Iran are winning the big PR battle, that all of a sudden the world is siding with the aggressors in this situation. Even though hostages haven't been returned, nobody is holding them accountable for that. Do you agree that there's been a huge PR sort of victory by Iran and Hamas? And what happens when Israel loses that? And what happens with Benjamin Netanyahu?
Right. Yeah. So Benjamin Netanyahu is kind of in the hardest political position of anyone on planet Earth at the moment. I do think there's a
Tell that to Mike Johnson.
Mike Johnson and Bibi Netanyahu, who lasts the longest. They had that thing with the British Prime Minister and the head of lettuce, like which one would go away first. Yeah, you could do Bibi and maybe Speaker Johnson, maybe. Although I think they both are better political athletes than we're giving them credit for, and I think they're going to hang around a little bit longer than people think. I think on the PR front, a big part of this driver is progressives in the Democratic Party who are really pressuring President Biden not to be so supportive of Israel. And his public statements are a gesture to them. Even though on the ground, the Biden administration has been providing Israel with a lot of material support, a lot of intel support, almost complete cooperation across the board, and kind of a staunch position with the Israelis vis-a-vis the Iranians in particular. Meanwhile, in public, the Biden administration votes against Israel at the UN effectively a couple of weeks ago, has made some statements about Bibi Netanyahu, the Chuck Schumer speech on the floor from three weeks ago. There are these gestures towards the progressives in the Democratic Party. So in addition to these international crises, Joe Biden as president is trying to keep his party together. And there's a lot of pressures inside the Democratic Party. And so that's coming out in these statements. If the president were out there with more foursquare support for Israel publicly, I don't know that Israel would be doing so poorly on the PR battle.
Okay. How does it end up? I mean, what's going on? Are we still going to have this war going on a year from now with Israel and Palestine? Are we still going to be in this, or will it have elevated? There's talk this morning that there's actually going to elevate directly between Israel and Iran, and the president yesterday saying that we were ironclad with Israel if a conflict breaks with Iran.
There's a lot of folks who are worried about that direct Israel-Iran confrontation. There's a lot of folks on the region who will tell you the real threat is Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israel, and a fight between Hezbollah and Israel would have would look much worse than the fight with Hamas. In a lot of ways, Hezbollah is much more capable than Hamas. I have a feeling at the end of the day, there's, as much as the Middle East is a mess, there are also all these pressures on things to kind of moderate a little bit. So there's a lot, I think we're less at risk than people realize. I think the administration, in the grand scheme of things, has done a good job of containing the possible bad outcomes here. As bad as the situation is, they've in part kept it from becoming worse. And I think that's going to continue. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on the system to resolve this conflict fairly quickly. And it may be on its way to being resolved now. There are very vigorous diplomatic discussions about the hostages, about a ceasefire. The number of Israeli troops in Gaza has been dramatically reduced in the last few weeks. So there are some signs here that things could be coming to a different phase, a more peaceful phase, hopefully, in the next few months. Joe Biden certainly wants this to end before the summer, before people really start thinking about who they're going to vote for in November, because this conflict is not good for him as president or for his reelection chances, and he knows that, and I think he is trying to tee this up to be resolved well before people start voting.
What are the chances?
I give the lion's share of the chances for this settling down by midsummer in the next couple of months, and this being a more stable situation going into our political season in the fall. Can't guarantee it. There's a lot of risks here, Michael, and there's a lot of variables, but the fact that it hasn't blown up to something bigger already is a minor miracle, and I think it's a good sign that this might be headed in the right direction.
You think it might be contained then? You don't think this blows up into something larger?
I don't think it does. Okay.
Les, we're out of time. Tell me what keeps you awake at night right now. What's your greatest fear going on in the world? I mean, I don't know how you're going to pick one, but I'd like to hear what you're coming up with.
I think the worst situation for the U.S. immediately is more of a Russian victory in Ukraine that leads to further violence against European countries, whether it's the Baltics, whether it's Moldova, but an expansion of Russian aggression in the region would be potentially catastrophic for U.S. interests. In the next year or two, that's the real nightmare scenario.
When does Russia run out of soldiers and bullets? I mean,
they don't.
How deep are their resources? How much more can they go after? It looks like they've been dealt a very severe blow, both economically and then just in terms of their ammo, bullets, all of their ability to actually conduct warfare, and the number of soldiers to do it. They've already emptied the prisons, is what we heard months ago.
Russia wins wars of attrition. That's what they do. They're not very good at being an imperial power. They can't really project power super well, but they win wars of attrition. They're not going to run out of people. They're not going to run out of resources. They got a ton of oil and gas they can sell to buy more bullets and make more bullets. We should not kid ourselves. They've got a lot of capability. They've been resilient in this thing in the sense that they can withstand all of the losses they're taking and then come back with more firepower. And we need
Les Munson's head of the BGR Group, government relations firm in Washington, was on Capitol Hill yesterday, has been doing this for decades, folks. It's why we like to listen to him. Les, I always learn so much. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Michael. My pleasure.
That's it for another FarrCast, ladies and gentlemen, as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world, bringing you experts and insiders to help us think more clearly and understand better the world in which we live, what's going on, what really matters, and how it's going to affect our investments over the long term, too. Hope this show has helped this week. We'll be back again next week with another one. For everybody at Hightower, for my producer, Harry Jennings, everybody at Farr Miller in Washington, thank you for listening. Please share us on your social media. Helps a lot. I'm very grateful to each and every one of you. In Naples, Florida, I'm Michael Farr.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the FarrCast. We hope you've enjoyed the show as much as we enjoy making it for you. Thanks to our guests, Kenny Polcari, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Les Munson. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. You can stream past episodes as well as subscribe so you never miss a new one. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific security, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it's not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And, as always, if we can be of assistance at Farr Miller in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com. We are here to help, and I'm happy to arrange for any of our listeners an appointment with one of our financial professionals to review your portfolio, your needs, and your goals. Please subscribe and share the show, and we'll be back with you next week. Our schedule in the coming weeks includes Dr. Jay Bryson, Chief Economist from Wells Fargo, Liz Young from SoFi, and fan favorite, Jenny Harrington. Take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. Thanks for listening to the FarrCast. Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.